I call the Honourable Member Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find myself in the unusual position of being the member in whose name the bill is being read, but not having spoken on this bill at either the first reading, the deliberation by the Select Committee, or until slot 10 or so of the second reason. And the reason for that is, unlike my colleague, he may well be right, but not on this case. In fact, the bill was introduced by the Honourable Amy Adams, who is now in Cabinet and cannot continue the bill, and I'm very grateful to her for passing the bill on to me for its safe passage through the House. But I also want to acknowledge and thank Louise Upson, my junior whip and friend, who, because of my inability to be able to do so last Members' Day, moving the bill be read a second time. I also want to acknowledge Dr Prasad's very thoughtful comments on this bill, because I think he does articulate a widely shared view about the importance of this issue as it relates to members of the public, and that was clearly set out in the advice given to the committee by the Commerce Commission, who said that in their research they found widespread public support for greater transparency in the amount of money that was collected by those collecting on behalf of charities. And it's worth stressing that the purpose of this bill is not to reduce that very strong charitable streak that is in all New Zealanders, but merely to give them more information within which to be able to make decisions about where that charitable effort could be put. As members know, I'm the liaison person for the Arthritis New Zealand Support Group, Parliamentary Support Group, and I'm also a member of the one that supports diabetes. And both of those organisations rely very heavily on public funding, public charity for their financial well-being. And I'm sure that nobody would want to see those organisations and others like them disadvantaged in any way. But I was very aware of a recent article in a Sunday paper around the amount of money that is retained by these organisations, and in some case in annual giving or monthly giving, which is becoming quite the norm. A particular group, fundraising group, keeping the full first year's donations by members of the public for themselves, and so it would be a full year before any 1 cent of that money is ending up in the charity's bank balance. Now, that may well be perfectly appropriate. I'm not suggesting for a moment that there is a rort. I think that was a word that Dr Prasad used. I'm not sure I would agree with that. But I do think that much greater transparency and informed decision-making is appropriate. I just want to touch on another couple of issues about the use of the initial clause that was proposed to be amended and that being described as an inappropriate mechanism. I think that's a little harsh on the member introducing the bill, and indeed I'm a little surprised that there hasn't been some concern by some members about the use of regulation, which is usually the response, oh, very good. Well, we'll hear a little bit about that, but I think that's a valid question to be asked about whether regulation should be used in this way. But that was carefully considered by the Select Committee and felt on balance, and in the context of the Fair Trading Act review that's going on, to be the best way in order to deliver the policy intent of this bill. So I wouldn't call that either of those two options an inappropriate mechanism, but the very important thing is that the Minister, prior to passing those regulations, consults very carefully with the sector before such regulations are passed. Two other things raised the issue of whether this should be a government measure. Well, there are two aspects that I would say to that. One is the government has a very busy legislative program, far more required to go through to deliver its plan than ours available, and that members' days can be used for things that could otherwise be a government bill. But the other inference is that somehow members' days are only for opposition members, and I don't think that's appropriate. As a backbench government member, Mrs Adams and others on this side of the House have come up with very good ideas for how legislation can be passed or improved, and I think it's entirely appropriate that government backbench members also have this day to be able to advance their ideas. The last thing I want to say, and I think it was a very good point raised by Dr Prasad, and that was on the issue of non-compliance. And as the member in charge of this bill, although I cannot address that specific issue today, it has been something that I've been reflecting on, and that when we do return to examine the bill in more detail at the committee stage, I'd be very happy to answer any questions in respect of that and what the appropriate response is to ensure that compliance is encouraged first, and then any sanctions if necessary for non-compliance. So I thank the member for raising it. I think it's a very good point which I share. Other than that, Mr Speaker, I commend the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable David